Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again, and thanks for being flexible on the time. Had a crappy scheduling thing pop up on me yesterday, so thank you for being flexible. Um, Last time in our class, we were talking about sharing dashboards. We were also talking about submitting the assignment you need for a certificate of completion. I know that some people have had some issues that they're running into with the method of sharing that I provided. So I'm going to give you an alternative to that. But sharing these dashboards and pushing them to your organization is actually really important. So I'm going to just quickly review what we ended our last class on. So for those of you who have been following along, you should have a dashboard that looks something like this, and we're prepared to share it at this point. So we talked about mobile layouts and how you can create a mobile version of this. Now, if you're using a Microsoft account, so I'm using mine, the domain is BD Analytics LLC on Microsoft.com, then your name will show up there. If you're not signed into an account and you're just using a free version, that's totally fine. The problem that we're running into is a lot of you are using government accounts, and when you actually share the dashboard, I can't access it unless your government agency creates me an email address. So we're going to talk about how to work around that. But whenever I share this, whenever I push it to Azure, it's going to go to this domain's share space. So my company has like 2 terabytes of Azure space. And if I log into this account via the Power BI app on my phone, which you can download for iPhone or for Android, you can access these mobile layouts on your phone. It's a pretty cool feature. So to push these into Azure, all you have to do is make sure that you're signed in somewhere. We're going to go home, and then we're going to hit publish. And ask if you want to save changes. Always good practice to go ahead and do that. And then you have to choose a workspace where this goes. Now, by default, everybody should have a workspace called My Workspace, but you might have others if you're in an organization that's built out a couple of different additional workspaces. Hit select, and it's going to publish. When this publishes, not only does it publish the dashboard and the mobile view, but it also publishes the data. So the poor man's way of updating dashboards that are shared through your organization is just to republish. So if you are pulling in data into your desktop version of your dashboard every day, you can republish and write over your existing stuff, and it will push that data into the cloud. If you want to automate that process, you need what's called an on-premise data gateway, and that's a little beyond the scope of this class. We only have 1 more hour, but I did want to give you at least one method of which you can update your data once it's actually in the cloud. And once that's published, you're going to come to powerbi.com. It may ask you to log in, but this is your landing space, and you can see a workspaces tab down here. And this is going to coordinate with all of the workspaces that you saw when we went to publish the dashboard in the first place. So I'm going to go to workspaces, and I'm going to go to my workspace where I just published this dashboard. And my dashboard's name was Journ. So if I click on the file there that says Journ, I can pull up my dashboard here. And you'll notice that I've got a page for every one of the pages that were in my desktop version. Now you can actually use this cloud-based version of Power BI to actually build dashboards, but the functionality is reduced. If you are somebody who makes paginated reports and you want to make paginated reports in Power BI, you can do that. You have to use the cloud-based version for paginated reports. For any report that when you print it off, it could be more than 1 page. That's what a paginated report is. Again, a little beyond the scope of what we're doing here, but I did just want to make that point. So once you publish this, if you are ready to share your assignment with me, you should be able to come over here to File, choose Embed Report, and Publish to Web, Public. If you have this option, what it's going to do is it's basically just going to make a website inside this domain. There we go. You can copy this link out, put it in an email and send it over to me. I'll come in and check out your dashboard, and we'll call you done. So like if I come over here now and check this dashboard out, you can see that I've got like the end user version of the dashboard. This is what everyone can see. And then come in here and interact with stuff. It's just dynamic. If you get to this screen and you do not have a publish to web public option, what that means is you're probably logged into an organization that doesn't just put stuff out there. So in that particular case, what I'm going to encourage you to do is just save your desktop Power BI file to your computer, attach it to an email and shoot it over to me. And I'll judge it that way. We'll just make this a little bit easier. If you are working with a government email and you want to try to share it out, push the dashboard out to the internet, you can try signing out and just doing it as a guest. Not sure if that will work or not, but you're welcome to give that a shot. Okay, so I gave out the assignment last week. If you didn't get it for whatever reason, shoot me an email, let me know. We'll be happy to fix you up with that. Essentially, the assignment is to create a dashboard just like the one that we've created together. There are some requirements, like you have to have a certain number of filters and a certain number of visualizations. Once I either get the link to your embedded dashboard, or I get an email with your attached dashboard just in a flat file, I'll go through and make sure that you've met all the requirements, and then I will shoot out a certificate of completion. And I will start doing that first thing next week. So I know that a few people have already turned it in. I haven't forgotten about you. I'm getting to you, but it's probably gonna be like Monday or Tuesday when I start shooting this out. Okay, so today, moving on to the new content that we're getting into, we're going to get into data modeling. And data modeling can be a little bit of a difficult concept, especially for newer analysts who have never analyzed relational data before. So I am going to pull up a little bit of a PowerPoint that I'm going to go through really quickly. Oh no, I lost that slide. Here we go. So data modeling becomes necessary whenever you want to create a dashboard that looks at multiple pages of data at once. So far, everything that we've done has just been reading offense data. But if you wanted to create a dashboard that could analyze both offense data and CAD data at the same time, you would have to create a data model. So what do we mean by modeling? Those of you who come out of academia, you've heard the term modeling to refer to hypothesis testing, like multivariate modeling, OLS regression, multivariate logistic regression, stuff like that. Data scientists use the term modeling to refer to like machine learning. So it's kind of like a reactive version of academic modeling. So for instance, I have a machine learning model that I made that banks run, and it basically takes everything we know about money laundering, and it applies a risk score to every transaction that comes into the bank and says whether it's high risk or low risk for being involved in money laundering. We're using the term modeling a little bit differently. In this context, modeling means using text, symbols, and diagrams to create a visual representation of data as it's captured, stored, and used at your agency. This is a really important concept because to this point, there's been no real potential for error in terms of aggregation. So like if you were to put just one sheet of offenses in there and you were to say, give me a sum of offense numbers, that number's right. You're not going to get that count right. But the minute you start modeling and you start connecting things together, how you connect those tables together impacts all of your calculations on your dashboard. And this is a really insidious thing because if you model something incorrectly, you go to build a dashboard, it's going to still give you numbers and output. It's going to look like it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, but those numbers will be wrong. And there's nothing worse, especially when you're working in law enforcement agencies, to put something out there that is incorrect. Someone will call you on it. You'll lose a whole bunch of legitimacy. Creating links between tables improperly may result in incorrect information or no information being displayed. Here is just an example of a data model inside Power BI. Those of you that are familiar with Microsoft Access, this is going to look tantalizingly similar, but I'm encouraging you to forget what you know because those are actually doing two very different things. In Microsoft Access, you kind of make a diagram of tables to show the system how they connect together for the purposes of query. Here, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're not necessarily combining all 5 of these tables together into a schema so that we can run a SQL query and get one table of data out of the 5 of them. We're telling the system how we're going to allow say, a slicer built on the date table to filter a bar graph built on the financial table. It's a little bit of an abstract concept, but we're going to get into it. So for instance, let's just say you have a situation like this, where you have offense data on the left and CAD data on the right. Those of you that are familiar with SQL, especially Microsoft Access, that represents tables very similarly, you might think, okay, well, what I'm looking for is a key field here. And so I'm going to look for a field that both of these tables have in common, and I'm going to join them together using that field. If you were to do that, you would create a real problematic visual. You would probably get numbers wrong. And the more you make that mistake and the more data you integrate, the bigger these problems compound. So analyzing 2 tables of data, you could actually make a mistake and still get away with it. But once you start adding 4, 5, 6 tables of data to your data model, all of a sudden those mistakes are going to start to compound exponentially, and you're going to have a real mess. So I could talk for a whole week on data modeling. We have an hour. So I distill this down to the simplest principles that I can possibly distill them down to. Whenever you're conceptualizing a data model, I want you to start by thinking about your slicers. What do I want to be able to filter this dashboard on? So for instance, if we have a dashboard that's looking at CAD calls for service and offenses at the same time, I might want to be able to filter on date range, right? I might want to be able to filter on the name of the responding officer, because officers write reports and they respond to CAD calls. I might want to be able to filter on the zone or the district or the beat or whatever geographic areas you subdivide the city into, because those are going to have both offenses that occur and CAD calls for service. So start by thinking about what you want to slice on, and then we're going to create distinct value tables for those slicers to read. What that means is if you want to build a slicer on zones, for instance, we need a table where every zone occurs exactly 1 time. So if you have 8 zones, there should be 8 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 all occur on their own row. That's a unique value. If you want to filter on dates, then every potential date needs to occur on its own row. But of course, if you're looking at like 5 years worth of data, you're like, how am I going to make a table that's got 2,000 unique values? There's built-in functionality in Power BI that does that sort of thing for you. So don't let the number of unique values intimidate you away from this. In our example, we're going to be filtering on a couple different things, actually. We're going to filter on person's name, or maybe we'll do zone. And then we're also going to be able to filter on date. You can create these distinct value tables a number of ways. For some of these things, we'll just use Excel. Like if there's 5 possible values, like, if you've got 5 bureaus or 5 zones in your city and you want to use that as a slicer, I'm just going to fire up Excel. I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to bring that into Power BI. But something like dates, there's a million possible dates. We're going to use a DAX statement to create those tables. You can also use services like Mockaroo that simulate data for you. We don't really have time to get into that today. All right, so we're going to go over how to create these unique value tables. Then once we've got those tables, we're going to build connections from the distinct value tables to the data tables you want to aggregate. In this case, we're going to build connections from the distinct value tables to the CAD call for service table or to the RMS offenses table. There's a bunch of different types of links you can make in Power BI. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you is to never, ever, ever use many-to-many connections. So if we've got 2 tables and we're joining them together, if every value in table 1 can only join to one other potential value in table 2, that's a 1-to-1 connection, that's fine. We can use that. Don't run into that very often, but it does happen. Those are totally fine. You can also use 1-to-many connections. So if one potential value in table 1 can connect to multiple values in table 2, that's 1-to-many. What we absolutely have to avoid is many-to-many. And there are times when a many-to-many connection is actually appropriate and you can use it. They are very rare and they're very complicated. So as you're starting out on this, my advice to you is do everything you can to minimize many-to-many connections. And then we're going to mostly do direct joins here. But we'll start out with this sort of as an example. So here is a very skin and bones dashboard. And as you can see, we've got a card over here counting offense reports on the left, and then we've got a card over here counting calls for service on the right. Two different sets of data, but they're both able to be filtered by this date slicer in the middle. And that's because underneath this dashboard, we have a data model where offenses are stored in one table, CAD calls for service are stored in another, and then we have a table of unique dates in the middle. And then if we look at how this is reflected in the dashboard, this date range slicer will be built off of this date table. And then, of course, the offense count will be built off of the offense table, and the calls for service count will be built off of the CAD table. Okay, so let's look at our example dashboard. And I'm actually just going to start by building that visualization. We just want one visual that looks at RMS offenses and one visual that looks at CAD, and we want one slicer that can filter them both simultaneously. So I'm going to fire up a new page here. And we've actually already got a card that counts total offenses. So I'm just going to copy and paste it onto my new page. There we go. So we've got our offense count, right? If you look over here at the data section, though, we don't have any CAD data available. So we're going to have to bring that in from somewhere. And so if you look at the file that you downloaded at the beginning of the class, you should have a CSV file in there called CAD. And that's going to contain all of our CAD calls for service data that we're going to use. And so if you actually open this up and take a look, do you guys on your folders have a subfolder called Power BI 12/2024? Did I give you guys that one, or did I give you a... Does everybody have a file in there that's just called CAD? I want to just make sure of that before we keep going. Don't leave anything in the dust. All right, I'm not hearing any complaints, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that everybody's got CAD data. So to get that data, we're going to go to Get Data, and we're actually not going to choose an Excel workbook, because even though that icon, when you look at it in Windows, looks like an Excel workbook, it's actually a CSV. So I'm going to come down here to text/CSV, and then I'm going to navigate over to that folder. I'm going to bring in my CAD file. So when you do this, a couple things are going to change. First of all, you're going to see that same data import folder that you saw the first time we brought in RMS offense data. You could hit transform data to go into Power Query, but for right now, we're just going to hit load. Once it's loaded, over here in your data tab, you should see a second table, and you can drop this little caret down, and it will show you all the columns in the offenses table or in the CAD table. If you come over here to your table view, you can switch back and forth between offenses and CAD, and you can actually just see the raw data underneath. And importantly, when you come to model view, there's now two tables over here kind of floating out in space, and we have to find a way to connect the two of them together. So before we go to date, because date's a little bit more advanced, I'm actually going to do something a little simpler. So to figure out how we can slice these, because remember, we're going to start with slicers, we have to find fields that both these tables have in common. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom of these tables, each one of them has a zone field. So we could create a slicer that sliced a card that counted both CAD calls for service and offenses off of zone. And that's what we'll start with. That's going to be really easy. Before we do that, though, I'm going to go ahead and make a second card in here that counts calls for service. So to do that, I'm just going to copy and paste this total offense count card. Move this over to the right. And then over here in the fields section, with this total offense count card selected, I'm going to hit that X and clear that out. And then I'm going to come over here and drag in the CAD number column. And it's going to default to a sum. I'm going to change this to a count distinct. So I've got 10,000 offenses and 100, and also 10,000 calls for service. I'm going to change the name on this card so I don't confuse myself. And again, to do that, I'm going to select the card. I'm going to go to Format Your Visual. I'm going to go to Title under General and just type in total calls for service in the text. So our goal with making this model is to create a slicer that can slice both of these cards at the same time. So coming back to our model, we've already identified that we have a zone field in common. And before we do anything else, I would encourage you to just look at the values there. So I'm going to come over here to Table View, and I'm going to select CAD, and I'm going to look at Zone. And I see that the zone values here are Z1, Z3, Z5, Z2. And if I come over here to offenses, and I look at the zone, those are just numbers. They don't have Z's. So they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's the same information. It's just stored two different ways. And you see this very often in police, RMS, and CAD systems. And so this is really important because we have to find a way to standardize these because we have to create a table of unique values that we can use to connect both. So I'm just going to fire up Excel. And I'm going to make that table from scratch. And so I'm going to come here and I'm going to start a new column, and I'm going to call this column Zone. And I'm going to use the first value system. This is Z1, Z2, Z3, Z4, Z5, Z6, Z7, Z8. So now I've got a table that's only got one column, but it's got unique zone values, and they match what we were seeing in CAD, but they don't match what we were seeing in offenses, and that's okay for right now. We're going to fix that in just a second. So I'm going to save this as on PC. On my desktop, I'm going to call this Journ Zones. I know that this is a little complicated and we're jumping back and forth between a bunch of windows. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute and stop me. I'm more than happy to go back over something. But at this point, all I've tried to do is create a table of unique values that matches the zone value in one of our tables. So I'm going to go back to Model View. And from here, I'm going to bring in that new Excel that I just made. So I'm going to go to Get Data, Excel Workbook. I'm going to my desktop, find my Journ Zones Excel file. There it is. It's going to do the same thing that we did before. You're going to select sheet 1. It's not recognizing that that first row is a column header. That's actually fine. That doesn't matter. So long as all the values here are unique, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to hit load. I can fix that if I want, but. All right, so now I've got this third table of zone values kind of floating out here in space. I'm going to click on this so that there's a green border around it. And I'm going to open up the properties window, which is here. And I'm going to rename this zones just to keep myself straight. So I don't wind up doing anything later, but it's unfortunate. And now if we look over here in the data tab, you can see that there's a third table that's called zones. And again, if we look at our offenses table, CAD table rather, the values in zone should match up to the values in the zone column inside CAD. So I'm ready to make my first link. So I'm going to link this table of zone values over to the zone column in CAD. Now, when you make a link, it's going to bring you to this little new relationship pane. And it's going to show you a couple things. First of all, it's got the tables and the columns that you're making this link on highlighted in gray. So this first section up here is the zones table. The second one is the CAD table. There's only one column in zones, and it's showing me by highlighting the zone column over here that that's the one that we're linking to in CAD. You're going to see those cardinalities that I was talking about earlier. This one is one to many, which is totally fine. Power BI will make a distinction between one to many and many to one, and that really is just which table is on top and which table is on bottom. It doesn't really matter. So long as it's either one to many or many to one, it's the same thing for our purposes. That's totally fine. And the cross filter direction is single. So I'll explain what that means. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now you'll notice that whenever it makes this link, we've got some icons going on here. On this part of the link, there's a 1, and on this part of the link, there's a little starburst asterisk. That indicates that this is a one-to-many connection with unique values in this table and non-unique values in this table. And then this is your cross-filter direction. Notice that it's an arrow that's pointing towards CAD. I like to think of it like this. Your filters are like water, and your cross-filter directions tell you in what way the water can flow. So if I were to build a slicer on this zones table, that slicer will be able to slice the visuals that you build off of the CAD table. But if you were to build a visual on the CAD table, it will not be able to filter things that you built on the zone table. Now you might say, well, why wouldn't I just want everything to be able to filter everything? And again, when you've got two tables connected, maybe that's fine. But the more you add data to your data model, the more, if everything's flowing in both directions, it's going to become ambiguous about what is supposed to be filtering what, and the system will blow up. It won't actually blow up, but whenever you go to make a link, it won't let you hit save, and it'll say there's an error somewhere in the model, there's ambiguous joins, go back and fix your model. So to prevent that from happening, I use one-to-many connections as much as I possibly can. Okay, so you should have your zones table with a filter going, or with a link going over to the CAD table. And if you come back to your dashboard now, let's go ahead and build a slicer off of that zone table. So I'm just going to grab the slicer button, which is this table with a little filter on it. And then I'm going to go to zones and pull column 1 into the field. And you can see all of our different zones are there. And you'll notice that as I go through and I click on the different zone values, the call for service card is filtering. So there were 1,240 calls for service in zone 5, but the offense card is not doing anything. That's because the zone table is not connected to the offense table yet. We have to find a way to do that. So if we come over here to our zones, we're going to do the same thing to this zone column. I click and drag. Column 1 is now connected to the offenses table. We've got one-to-many connect cardinality again. Cross-filter direction is single. All of that's great. So I'm going to click save. And you can see the same visualization. There's one-to-many with an arrow flowing from zones over to offenses. But there's a problem here. If we come back over to our dashboard, whenever we filter between the zones, well, now all of a sudden there's just blanks in the offense part. That's because whenever we look at the zone values in our unique value table, they don't match up with the zone value in the offense table. Remember, in zones, we chose Z1, Z2, Z3, but in offenses, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So what we can do at this point is create a calculated column inside the offenses table that will match up with our unique values table. So to do that, I'm going to make sure that I've got offenses selected. I'm going to click on new column. I'm over here in table view. So I'm going to just call this zone 2. Remember, everything that comes before an equal sign is the name of a new column. And then I want the column values to start with the letter Z. So I'm going to put a quote here and a capital Z. Close the double quote. Then I'm going to put an and sign. And then I'm going to open a square bracket. I'm going to pull in the zone column by just typing zone and then closing a square bracket. And then I'm going to click on a green check mark. So what we've done very quickly here in the offenses table is create a column that will match up with our unique values table that we're going to build our slicer on. So I'm going to go back over to our model view, and I'm going to change up this connection here, because now we need column 1 to be connected to this table based on zone 2, not on zone. So I'm going to double click on this, and all I'm going to do is come over here to my offenses table. Your offenses table might be showing up at the bottom here. I don't think it should, but it might. But I'm going to make sure that on the offenses table, I just click on zone 2. The zone 2 column is now shaded in gray. I'm going to click save. Give that just a second to do its thing. Aha, and as you can see, I've cleverly interjected some sort of error for us to troubleshoot together in this class because this dashboard is still not filtering correctly. Make sure that you've got make this relationship active checked and hit save. That's a problem. So now if we go back to our dashboard and we click on our zone values, both of these cards should be filtering. Now, just pause for a second. You don't necessarily have to follow along for this part, but I just want to make the point, why do we do this? Why are we filtering 2 cards? Well, because now everything that we build off of both of these tables can be filtered by this slicer. So say, for instance, you want to make a bar chart. Well, I can come over here to my offenses. I can put in my stuff that I need. This is going to filter the bar chart and the card. And now I can come over here to CAD as well and maybe do a bar chart that looks at all type or something. So now I can get a really holistic view of zone 3. I can tell you, all right, inside zone 3, we've had 1,714 offenses, 1,256 calls for service. The most common call for service type is traffic, and the most common offense is 13A. So we can do more than just filter cards with these slicers. We can now filter any visualization that we might build off of either of these sets of data with this slicer. I do want to pause there for just a second and ask if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any questions come in, and nobody's raising a hand or anything, so I'm going to keep going. But of course, at any time, if you want to pause, let me know. Okay. So at this point, we've got a dashboard that can filter 2 sets of data on zone. But if we wanted to build a second slicer, then we have to put in a second table of data, and that also has to be connected to these 2 tables. So let's look at data curve. Both offenses and CAD have a date column in them. And again, we're going to want to make sure that we look at those values first. So I'm going to look at CAD. And very interestingly, CAD has a date value in a date time format. Date time format generally can cause some real issues. It's powerful information to have. We definitely want it for like, if you want to do day of week, hour of day heat maps, you need date and time. However, for the purposes of modeling, this becomes a real issue because, well, I mean, there's 365 day values in 1 year. If you have five, if you want to be able to look at 5 years worth of data, that's 2,000-ish unique values. But if every minute of every hour of every day is its own potential value, you'd have to have just a gajillion unique values in your table. So typically what I tell people to do is if you're working with date time, that's great, but you need to create a column that is just the date. And fortunately, ChatGPT or Power BI gives you the ability to do that. If we look at our offense values, our date occurred, also date time. So we're going to start off by making a unique table of date values. However, we're also going to have to create 2 new columns in both of these tables to connect it. And so I have at times told you guys the merits of ChatGPT. I strongly encourage you, as you're learning to write DAX statements, lean on heavily. It's great. So there's actually a native function inside Power BI strictly for making date value tables. And so I can just go to ChatGPT and I can tell it, I am working in Power BI. I need a DAX statement to create a date table. Date values should include everything from 1/1/2019 through 1/1/2030. And I'll put this formula in the chat. So if you're just watching and you're like, how to check that out, don't worry about that. So you can see that it's giving us a formula here. This is going to give us actually a pretty robust date table that's going to have lots and lots of columns. So I can copy this, go back to my Power BI, go to my model view, and hit new table. It's the exact same process to create a new table with DAX as it is to create a new column. So it brings up this formula bar. I'm going to paste this in. Essentially what this is doing is it's using the calendar function to create unique date values on every row. But then it's also going to create a column called year, another one called month, another one called month number, quarter, weekday. We don't really need all of these columns, but they're kind of neat to have. They kind of show off the value of DAX. I'm going to hit my green check mark. I'm going to post this in the chat real quick so that everybody can use it. And I will pause there to let you guys catch up, and I will ask Eric what his question is. Eric, I'm seeing in the chat that you got a question. Going back one step, instead of adding the calculated column, could you create 2 columns in that new table, one with Z1 and one with just ones related that way? Yes, you could. And actually, that's an even more concise way to do it. So what he's suggesting is in this zones table, I created this using Excel, so I could just update it with Excel. I'll show that really quick. You could have created a second column that just did like this. And then whenever I actually go to model it, I could connect this to CAD and this to RMS, and that would work fine as well. But I like to shoehorn in DAX for problem solving in these classes, so I can't give you everything the easy way. But that would have worked, absolutely. Any other questions before we get going? All right. So at this point, you should now have this date table floating around. And if you click on it, make it green, go over here to your table view, you can see what's going on here. So we've got a date table. Unfortunately, it looks like this date table also gave us our date values in date time format. And we'll have to change that. But you can see every row is a unique date value. And then it gives you some columns that parse out other information about the date, like the year, whether or not it's on a weekend, the day of the week, stuff like that. I don't know why that's in. No, there we go. All right, so we need to change all of these date value columns to just simply date columns. So let's start with our date table to do that. So I'm going to come up here to my table view for the date table. I'm going to click on new column. I'm going to name this column date 2. And I'm just going to use the function, I believe it's date, yeah? Date value, there we go. I'm going to use the date value function. I'm going to type date value with an open parentheses. Then I'm going to open a square bracket. I'm going to put my date function in here. And then I'm going to close the parentheses. And then I'm going to hit my green check mark. Now, this actually is going to create a date time column as well. But because it's calculated, once you have this selected, you can come up here to date time and just change this to date. Now, I have a personal preference here. You don't necessarily have to do this, but if you come over here to format, I like to change mine to short date. I think that just makes it a little bit easier to understand what it is that I'm doing. So we've created a copy of the date column. We've changed that copy to just a regular date, and then I made it a short date as well. So that was all inside the date table. Let's do offenses next. So the date column here is called date underscore occurred. So I'm going to go to new column. I'm going to call this one date 2 as well, just to keep it easy. I'm going to use the date value function again. I'm going to put the date occurred column inside that function and close the parentheses. I will put a copy of this in the chat just in case anybody's sitting there struggling to read what it is that I'm doing. Then once I've got that column created, I'm going to change the type from a date time to a date. And I'm going to change the format to short date. And now you can see all the values in this column called date 2 should match up with all the values inside our date table. So then we can go to CAD, and I'm going to do the exact same thing a third time. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click new column. I call it date 2 equals. I'm going to use the date value function. I put the date field in. Put my check mark. Change this from a date time to a date. And change this to a short date. And again, just in case anybody needs it, I will put that formula in the chat. All right. So we haven't actually made a model yet, but we've now made 3 columns that can all connect properly to each other. I named them all date 2. If you name them something else, just keep that in mind. So now with this date table in the middle, I'm going to create my links to be able to make this slicer in the exact same way we did before. I'm going to click on date 2. I'm going to drag it over to date 2 in offenses. It's going to bring up the relationship table. Again, I've got the date table up here, and it's highlighting the date 2 columns, letting me know that that's where the first part of this connection is. Then over here, it's got the offenses table, and it's highlighting the date 2 column to let me know where the other side of this connection is. There's a one-to-many, which we like. The cross-filter direction is single, which we like. And of course, I've made sure this time not to make the boneheaded mistake of unchecking make this relationship active. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to do the same thing with CAD. So I'm going to take date 2 and drag it over to date 2. And I'm seeing, yep, my date 2 columns are both highlighted. That's good. Cardinality is one-to-many. Cross-filter direction is single. Make this relationship active. I'm going to hit save. So now if I come back over here to my dashboard, I should be able to make a date slicer that can filter both sides of this dashboard. But very importantly, I have to build it off of the date field inside the date table. So here's the date table. I need the date here to be my slicer, because that's the only thing that can slice both tables of data. So I'm going to put slicer in. I'm going to put my date field inside. And if I mess around with this slicer, what I should see is that it begins to edit both, or it begins to filter both sides of the dashboard. And it does. So that means that I've probably done this correctly. I want to just take a minute to pause. I'll ask if there are any questions. I'll give you guys a second to type them in. I know that what we just went through is, if you've never really worked with relational data, and even if you have, before I had done this, I had worked with relational data a lot in the terms of writing SQL. So you have to figure out how tables fit together to query out one table of data that you're now going to build analytics off of properly. This is a little different because now, instead of analyzing one table of data that might have come from multiple tables of data, we're actually analyzing an entire body of data all at once. And this is really the biggest differentiator between Power BI and something like Excel. Excel is really good for doing a lot of things, but Excel really can only analyze one table of data at a time. You got multiple tables of data in one Excel sheet that are all being analyzed at various places, but you can't create, at least not very concisely, one slicer that can edit two sides of the dashboard at the same time. You can't edit this entire body and all of their connections. You just have to have these tables that aren't linked together. And so this really unlocks a lot of the power of Power BI. But I do want to pause here, ask if there are any questions, and also just stress that at this point, if you've connected multiple tables together, you really should go in and do some validation. So if you've got, let's just say a SQL pull that you do, or a front end of an RMS that you trust, I would at this point come in here and I'd put in a date range, and 1/2/2019 to 2/28/2024. I would use that other tool and I would say, okay, how many calls for service does this other tool say occurred in the state range in zone 5? How many offenses does this other tool say occurred in the state range in zone 5? And just make sure that those numbers match. If they don't, try to figure out why, because part of the issue might be that you built the model incorrectly, and that's just something that you should be aware of before you start publishing things. I'm going to check real quick to see if there are any questions. How do we change the slicer to have the end date as the current date? Fantastic question. So this slicer's end date is going to be 1/1/2030. And the reason is because if you look at the date table, the largest value is 1/1/2030, because that's how I told the DAX to simulate it. What we can do is put a relative date filter on this. So if you come over here, I'm going to select the date slicer, make sure it's got its gray frame around it. I'm going to open up the filters pane. Then I'm going to pull in date into filters on this visual. And I'm going to change it to relative date. And in the relative date options, I'm just going to say, hey, show me stuff that occurred in the last 99999 years. It may not let you do that many. There we go. 9,999 days. Apply filter. Now, you might have to bring the end of your date slicer down and then bring it back up for it to reflect the change. But now you'll notice that it's only going to display values in that table that occur in the last 9,999 days, which means today and like 20 years in the past or whatever it is. But it won't show any future dates. So every time you refresh this data and open this up again, the last date will always be through today, which something to be aware of because police departments are notoriously bad about putting future crimes in, call them future crimes. It's like you hear the data and it's like, they say this robbery occurred in the year 3758. Obviously, it's entry errors. So you might exclude stuff like that, which if you're not careful matching up your queries with your other tools, like when you go to validate this number, might account for why numbers are different. Just something to keep an eye on. But that's how you would set it up. And that's what I would do for my end users as well. I wouldn't have to force them to come and filter down 6 years before they see anything useful. Any other questions? All right, I am going to very quickly, I'm going to do this more as a demonstration than as something to actually follow along with, just because it is a little complex and we don't have a whole lot of time. So one of the more useful tools that you can use inside Power BI is a day of week, hour of day heat map. I mentioned the hour of day in these tables is really helpful because you can do advanced stuff, but there's some problems with it when it comes time to make a model. And so I just wanted to exemplify what you can do with this. So I'm going to go to my model view and I'm going to go to get data. I'm going to go to Excel workbook. I'm going to navigate to the stuff that we downloaded. And then there is a file in there called useful Excels, and one is called day of week. The other one is called hour of day. I'm going to bring in day of week. And hit load. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring in hour of day. I'm going to hit load. So now I've got a table of days of the week, which lists the values out with a number, followed by the name of the day of the week, 1 period Monday, 2 period Tuesday. And then hour of the day, that's just 0 through 24. And then over here in my offenses table, I want to use our date field to create fields that those can connect to. So I'm going to go to offenses. I'm going to go to new column. There's actually functions native inside Power BI for this. So you can use an hour function and just put in date occurred. And that will pull out the hour. And so you can see now it's listing a column that just gives it, if it occurs at 5:30 a.m., it's going to call that 5. And then we're going to create another column that is going to be day of week. It's day. There we go. Day. Day occurred. Nope, definitely day of week. Day of week. Weekday. I always get this confused. There we go. Now you notice that this is a little bit different because it doesn't have 1 period followed by the name of the day of the week. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to ask ChatGPT, because my mind is slipping, change this formula so that it displays 1.Monday for Mondays 2.Tuesday for Tuesdays, etc. Paste in the formula. It's going to give me a really cool formula that I can use. I'm going to come back on over. Oh no. And here we go. Here's part of the issue with working with ChatGPT. It doesn't always understand what you want perfectly. So it's putting, it's not the day of the week number, it's the day of the month. So if the 30th is a Tuesday, it's putting 30 there. So I'm going to put my day of week back in here. There we go. So if we're looking over here at day of the week, we can see that 1 is Sunday, 3 is Tuesday. I'm just going to make sure that my values over here match up. They do. All right, so now I can make a model really quickly. Put my day of week in there, 1 to many, cross filter direction is single. Hour of day, I can put a connection here, again, 1 to many, cross filter direction is single. And now I can use that model to effectively make a time of day, hour of day heat map. So I'm going to start by putting a matrix in. I'm going to put the rows to be the hour of day from my hour of day table. Columns. My day of week is going to be my rows from the day of the week table. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then I'm going to put in some sort of value to aggregate, like what do we do, offenses? Yeah. So now I'm going to say, all right, show me how many offenses occur in each one of those cells. Put an offense number in. I'm going to tell it to count distinct. And now here, just like we did last week, you can do conditional formatting. So I'm going to use the background color. I'm going to use a gradient. And we're going to go from blue to red. And now we can see really quickly what days of the week and hours of the day are most problematic. And so, of course, most of the time, 4 a.m. to like 8 a.m. is usually pretty quiet. It's all simulated data, so we've got some funky patterns in here. But you would not be able to make this visual accurately without modeling. You can do it with just the offense table, but you're going to run into some problems, especially if you don't come in here and select I've noticed that some versions of Power BI have an option to, I think it's like maintain 0. Maybe I'm crazy. But yeah, you're going to run into some problems trying to create a visualization like this without using modeling. So I know that was a lot all at the end. If you want to build something like this and you're having trouble, shoot me an email. It's certainly not part of your assignment. But I just wanted to emphasize that you can do more things than just make these simple filters with modeling. You can actually make some very complicated, sophisticated visualizations that require modeling in Power BI as well. So with that being said, I'm going to cut it off there and just ask if there are any questions on anything that I've shown today. Yeah, the formula for weekday. Let me, the kind of janky one. Where am I? There we go. So that formula in particular, I put a number in front of the days. It was sort of arbitrary that Sunday was 1. You can change that up if you want. But I put a number in front of the days because if you don't do that, it will order these days kind of randomly or alphabetically. It won't do them chronologically. So you'll have like Monday, then Thursday, then Sunday than Tuesday, which makes the visualization difficult to work with. So when I do day of the week, I try to put a number in front of it, and that way Chat or Power BI automatically sorts by the number, and that means I can control the chronology of how it's displayed. All right. Well, thank you everyone for the last couple of weeks being together. For your assignment, if you can send me a link to where your dashboard is published openly, great. If not, just attach it to an email and send it over. I'm happy to grade it that way. And if you have any questions at all on the assignment or anything that we've covered, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to jump on a call with you and follow up a little bit later. And thank you all again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again, Charlie. We appreciate it. And we will post the recordings if you would like to work back over any of this. And once again, please take the evaluation that's in the chat. It really does help us out. Thank you.
Thank you, and everyone have a great weekend.